everyone for joining us today. It's great to be here and to see so many familiar names. Today we're going to be talking about 3D scanning for forensic use. I am here today with Sebastian, who you already know, and with Veronica Martínez. She is an anthropologist at Panacea, and she studied archaeology and then a master's in anthropology at the University of Granada, where she's pursuing her PhD in biomedicine and working in our team in Panacea. And I am doing a very similar thing. So we've had, both Veronica and I have been getting lots of scanning experience recently, and especially lately. I spent 1 month last autumn scanning skulls at the William Bates collection housed at the University of Tennessee. And Veronica has spent a couple of weeks scanning a collection from a museum in Catalonia in order to digitize it, but we've previously had plenty more experiences. So today we thought we would talk about scanning because this is a need that we encounter more and more frequently within our everyday work. And we have had quite some experience now with acquiring 3D models of different bones, but we've had to figure out a lot of the process and the best practices for particular use cases and applications all on our own. We feel that even though there are lots of training opportunities for 3D modeling and sculpting, for example, for facial approximation, working with 3D reconstruction of sites, as well as courses that are focused on 3D acquisition, but mainly for scene of crime or uses of photogrammetry, and not so frequently for scanning, right? So we're going to start by sharing a few of the main applications that we've found for the 3D models that in our day-to-day practice. On the first place, we have we can use them as digital record of archaeological sites or of archaeological findings. We can also use them in identification, for human identification, which will be, for example, scanning the skull or the teeth for applying different anthropological or dental techniques, such as comparative dental comparison, craniofacial superimposition, or facial approximation. We can also use different bones for comparative radiography if we have antemortem photographs. And well, this is our main focus, as you all know, in Panacea. But it is also, 3D scans are also a great tool for scientific and cultural divulgation. And this is also tied to their relevance in enabling access to physical collections to researchers all around the world, which is also very, very necessary right now. And they also have a wide array of applications in biomedicine, which is worth mentioning, as it is so closely related to our common fields of research. And it is, of course, very frequently used for collection and for storage of forensic evidence and in human rights investigations, as it allows to capture evidence both indoors and outdoors, and we can capture all kinds of evidence, not just the scene, human remains, bones. We can capture blood stain patterns, bullet holes, tool marks, shoe prints, etc. Right? But well, as you know, in Panacea, we deal mostly with the challenge of human identification. So we will be focusing today on tips and lessons that we've learned related to this topic. So maybe by now, most of you are already familiar with 3D models and what they are, but just in case, a very quick reminder, 3D models are a geometrical representation of a surface in the 3D world, and we call this geometrical structure a mesh. The mesh looks like what you see in the first image, highlighted in orange here. And well, we can also have a texture, as it says here, that would represent the material qualities of the object, such as its color, its shine. For any questions, please leave them in the chat, and we will be answering everything at the end, in order to keep these short, because we do have another event right after this one. So, well, we will see that each scanner works in a different way, but most frequently we will have the option to scan with or without texture in most scanners. We will see that in a minute. And it's important to not confuse the 3D models that are generated from a scanner with volumetric images, which are commonly produced by CT or MRI machines or CBCT machines also. And the main difference is that they do not just capture the surface, but they also capture information from the interior structure of the scanned object. And this can be a great advantage in some cases, as this is the only way that we can acquire images for comparison for sinuses, for example, or inside structures, right? But it may not be essential for the application we want the images for. So we will have to keep that in mind when we are selecting an image acquisition mode, right? It has to be the correct one for its purpose. Well, here we have another detailed view of what the mesh looks like like a geometrical structure, right? With a lot of triangles. So the main difference that we would have by acquiring the image with the scanner, like I was saying before, in comparison to volumetric images, is not just the texture, which is helpful. It's also that we have the inside of the bone, like I was saying. And here in this slide, we are seeing the different options that we have available to acquire 3D models of bones or bone fragments, starting with the structured light scanners, which we will be going into more detail later. We also have laser scanners that send light pulses at high speed, reflecting off objects and then returning to the scanner sensor. For each pulse, then the distance between the scanner and the object is measured by determining how much time has elapsed between the sent and the received pulses. For photogrammetry systems, they use a three-dimensional coordinate measuring technique that uses the photos for taking the measurements. And the main principle that is used in photogrammetry is the principle of triangulation, by which we are then, well, the software is then able to recreate the 3D surface of an object by using multiple overlapping pictures. And finally, we do have the volumetric image segmentation, like I was explaining, which is a method of dividing a digital image into subgroups that are called image segments. So we would have, for example, we can isolate the bone and we would have a bone segment, and then we could isolate soft tissue and then have a soft tissue segment. And then we are able to generate a 3D model from these segmented images and export it in the format file that we desire. Okay. So what are structured light scanners and how do they work? They are compact devices that integrate a variety of cameras and a light emitter. So, well, the light emitter basically, like you're seeing in the animation to the left, emits a pattern of light. We have a better video later in which you will be able to see this pattern much more clearer. But basically, the geometrical pattern that it's projecting onto the object is known and it's always the same. So then the cameras of the scanner capture the variation and the deformations of this pattern as the lights hit the object at different depths. And then this provides the software with point information to create a mesh that represents the 3D shape of the object. So the texture is frequently captured with an additional camera, or it can also be captured with a red, green, blue light pattern, like we are seeing in this example from the Artec micro. And well, the main advantage is that acquiring 3D images with 3D scanners both are that the scanners are portable, compact. They usually weigh less than 2 or 3 kilos. This means that you can take them as hand luggage on a plane. You can use them both indoors and outdoors, and it will only require simply like an extensor, or if you're close to electricity or a generator, depending on the location. But they're very generally easy to use, and they don't have a too complicated or steep learning curve. Usually the software is quite user-friendly, especially in the later or simpler models like the Einscan from Shining, which does not leave a lot of freedom to users. And once the scanning mode is selected, it's basically following the steps of the scanner. So it can be very straightforward. Also, the scanning and the post processing is very quick. For example, once I acquired some practice, I was scanning around 15 skulls and mandibles in an 8-hour workday, which would mean that in a half hours, it's possible to scan and process a complete skull and a mandible. But of course, these times will vary greatly according to experience, the structures that we are scanning, and also the state of preservation of the bones, if they are in a fragmented nature or not. And the main disadvantages would be the quality of textures are generally worse than if we are using photogrammetry. This is not the case in all scanners. We have higher end scanners like the Artex Spider that have very photorealistic textures, but of course the price is much higher. And also the price range for scanners is considerably higher than what we would spend on a digital camera if we were using photogrammetry. But it is a great investment if we want to digitize larger collections.
Okay, right. So now that we have already got to know and understand these devices and the features, we're going to talk about the scanning process itself. As you can see on the screen right now, there are three essential parts to this procedure: workspace preparation, scanning, and post-processing. And well, the first and most important step we should take care of is the conditioning of the area and the work material. I can't stress it enough how key it is to think about the following advice in advance so that we will save not only valuable and sometimes critical time, but also money and a lot of mistakes. So now, these are regarding the hardware, the necessity to make sure that we meet the minimum requirements beforehand. It can be really inconvenient in the best cases scenarios to suddenly realize that our computer is not compatible with the scanner we will be using or with the software. This will also almost certainly mean a relevant loss of money and time and could easily affect the results of a project. So here we can see listed at the top of the screen some of the most common requirements we will find, like medium high-end processors, dedicated graphic card with at least 80 gigabytes, a minimum of 16 gigabytes of RAM memory, and a minimum of 500 gigabytes of storage space. This is usually very similar between softwares and scanners. Now, regarding the materials, we have also listed the ones that you will probably need in any project you undertake, although this can really change from task to task and different tools could become necessary. So remember to also think about this in advance. Some of the most essential things that we always recommend taking with you are the ones that we can see in the picture and also at the bottom of the screen, like rotating tables, rows and gloves for working with the samples, power strips and extension cords. And this is really, really important to remember. There are never enough sockets surrounding you, so please take some of this. Some of this material to take notes and so on. And mattifying sprays, this is very important because sometimes we are going to be working with pieces which surface is very polished. So to get rid of this problem, mattifying sprays are very useful. And then non-invasive fixing materials such as tape, glue tack, temporary glues, and so on. Okay, now another important aspect to think about is the workspace itself. It should be a large and open area with spare space enough for us to comfortably move around the table when holding the scanner. And well, light should also be uniform and indirect. We should avoid closed windows or locating our tables where the color and intensity of the light varies during the day, for example. And again, we must make sure that there are enough sockets available and near the tables so that we won't trip and stumble over the cords or even tangle them. And that could be a problem, so be really aware of that. Finally, we should also take into account that if we are working outside, a tent will probably be essential to avoid direct light, and weather conditions and any other environmental damage to the PCs or devices we are working with. Now, finally, when preparing the samples, there's also some advice we should take into account. A lot of times skeletal remains are not well preserved. They are fragmented or just fragile. So being extremely careful when treating and manipulating the samples will help their correct preservation. And in this regard, we must also always work with non-destructive and easy to revert materials and techniques. And finally, when we are about to scan fragmented remains, we strongly recommend, and this is based on our experience, we always recommend that all the individual fragments are anatomically identified before scanning, so that we can precisely differentiate the digital model later. In the example of the pictures at the bottom, a preliminary reconstruction of the skull was necessary just to understand the anatomical position of each piece, and I'm going to show you a clip of this process. Okay, sorry, this wasn't meant to have sound. Now, as I was saying, a reconstruction of the piece was necessary to understand the position of each piece and the anatomical reference, because this can be really difficult to obtain later with the digital model, only as a reference. Okay. So
next, we're going to talk about some of the tips and good practices that we've developed for each bone or each structure. For the skull, I think there is some playing, sorry. Sorry. Well, for the skull, when it's complete, it will be ideally scanned separate from the mandible, just to avoid any problems with misarticulation or movement while we scan it. It can be later articulated properly using 3D software. This way we will have a complete model of each bone without losing information from the areas that are blocked in the base of the skull or around the teeth, which are very valuable for identification, as we all know. It will be also necessary to scan the skull from the top and then turn it and scan it from the bottom. For this, using a beanbag or skull donut can be handy, but if not, just a simple circle of masking tape will usually do the trick. I think, well, we found that it was helpful to, I think we can move on to, well, we found that it was helpful to scan it with using a rotating tray or a rotating turning table, right? Some scanners actually do come with a rotating table that can be set to rotate at specific intervals and for the scanner to capture frames at particular times. And well, then this can be done automatically and can reduce the time investment considerably. But it can also be done when the skull can properly be secured to the turning table. And in order to do so, we have attempted using different materials, but on robust specimens, this always is an issue because the skull is very heavy, and inevitably when turning the tray, it will shift a little bit. And then once it shifts from its original position, the scanner is not able to recreate a precise point cloud. What will happen is that we will have overlapping faces, and then we'll see some examples of these types of errors at the end. But well, this is usually a problem, and well, like you were seeing here in the video, for fragmented skulls, we will scan the biggest possible piece that we can reassemble. Generally, it would be necessary to do it slowly in order to avoid that it moves and shifts. And if they, then we would scan any pieces that we need and then reassemble it in any 3D software. And well, for long bones, they can also be used depending on the dimensions and the particularities of each scanner. But in this case, you're seeing the fine scan by Shinings with the automatic rotating table. Here, the femur told the joke. And well, to secure it to the rotating table, we are using blue tack, like you're seeing in this example, but any kind of adhesive putty that we can use that is not damaging to the bone will start. Um, Another option for scanning is just to rotate the tray manually. In this video, you're seeing, maybe you can appreciate that there are some dots on the rotating table, and they are there to help the scanner with the alignment of the different scans. They act like a steady pattern that remains unchanged as the tray rotates, and then it helps to place them as arbitrarily as possible so that the scanner can find its precise location, right? And not make even distributions with the dots. Here we are going to see another example of how we can prepare the samples to scan smaller bones, teeth, bone fragments like you're seeing here. We can use an adhesive putty and mold it into a ball, and then just create a base in which we can then stick the bone fragment. So you can see here how she created this ball, put the fragment into the scanner, and then she positions it where the scanner needs it, right? In the next video, we're going to see how this particular scanner works. This is the Artec Micro, and you see how this scanner has a robotic arm that automates the process, and it's really helpful. And what you're seeing now is how the scanner will be taking multiple steps, and with each turn, it will emit this line pattern that we were mentioning earlier, and as well as the red, green, and blue lights in order to capture both the geometry and the texture of the object from each angle. Here you can see that the image now is, we're moving to see the preview that the software is showing. And well, this is what the preview that we will see. While it's scanning, it does take a few turns until it captures the entirety of the process, of the object, sorry, and we would be ready to then process it. And here, I think this is our last detailed video of this light pattern that we've been talking about. I think you can see it in a little bit more detail right there, as it's projected onto the dome fragment. So we're gonna move now to the processing of the scans of the images. Now, okay, so
Okay. So once we have obtained the point cloud, we will notice that we also scan some irrelevant parts, such as the bones or the vegetable table, etc. Sometimes random points may appear out of the dense cloud just because some shadow perturbed the scan, or there was something moving around in the context of that item, in instance. Precisely because of this, I'm going to play the breakdown. Precisely because of this, the following step is essential when post-processing, which is cleaning the proper cloud. For the most part, scanning softwares do work pretty similar in this regard. They offer a set of editing tools, such as loop tools and erasers that assist and help us select the unwanted points and delete them. As you can see here in the clip, where I'm trying to erase the base and the support that I had scanned the skull over. Okay. Sorry, because it's taking some delay. Well, here we have another example, this time on a different software and scanner, a much smaller piece than the previous one, but a similar problem. We have to clean the scan base and blue tag that's holding the piece still in each one of the point clouds we have generated. Okay, you will see where it says at the right part, micro 1, micro 2, those are two different point clouds for the same piece. Okay. So Once our clouds are clean and we have erased all the unnecessary information, we will want to align our scans. And well, remember, we will have a different scan for each take we have done of the piece, usually a minimum of two. This wasn't meant to have sound either, sorry. Usually a minimum of two if we want to cover the PC's surface all the way around, but there could be three or even more. And when aligning, the software will look for similarities in the geometry of some extent of the different clouds so that it can superimpose a part of both clouds together to conform the object's 3D shape. And sometimes softwares will also use the texture of a piece for the same purpose. This is a possibility also. This process, when done manually, can be prone to error and sometimes very time consuming. But in some cases, this can be the only option because the software cannot find geometric particularities in the piece. Like, for example, this is a common problem with long bones, where the diaphysis is a very geometrically uniform part. But nevertheless, that's not the case most of the times, and an algorithm can usually perform this task in about seconds with really good results. Okay. Now, this one here, refining the alignment, is a complementary step, nonetheless indispensable in order to obtain good results. It consists of running another algorithm that further aligns, simplifies, and improves the cloud. I'm going to play it again so you can see it in detail. Although you may think that we have already done this in the previous slide, you can see here in the clip how this step significantly improves the general appearance of the cloud. So it is a really important step. Okay. Now, next was processing, generating the cloud, no? Where once our cloud, the mesh, sorry, once our cloud is clean and aligned, we will proceed to generate the mesh, as I was saying. And as my colleague explained at the beginning of this webinar, a mesh is nothing more than a set of triangles. So this step essentially consists of running another algorithm that joins all the points in the cloud between them, and so that each one of them is connected to two more, this way creating triangles. We can usually choose the minimum number of triangles we want the mesh to have so that the result can be more or less detailed. When there are not enough triangles, some important features and characteristics can be lost, but we will talk about this in a minute. And we will see some samples too. Okay. Then finally, applying the texture. Let me give it a little bit of zoom. The last step of the post-processing, sorry, as I was saying, is the application of texture. This meaning the moment when we paint, let's say like that, color to the surface of our object or our mesh. We already talked before about the texture cameras that some scanners include. And well, they basically take all the color information of the pieces and processes to paste it over the model to, in this way, recreate the visual aspect of the sample, the piece we are scanning. The process to apply the texture is, again, very easy and intuitive in the majority of softwares, and it barely consists of clicking over one button and waiting for the algorithm to run and do the magic. Some aspects of a texture, such as brightness, I'm going to play again the video because this is very visual, such as brightness, contrast, or tone, as I was saying, may differ a little bit from the real piece. And this is due to environmental and light conditions mostly, but also due to the presets and the calibration of the texture cameras. But well, it is easily fixable with the texture settings, the options available in the majority of softwares. Here in the clip, we can see how just by adjusting some parameters, we can modify the aspect of the texture until it coincides with the one of the real piece. Okay. Now, let's see this quick. Now, the model has been generated with both the mesh and the texture, but a very important, essential step is checking for errors in it. For that, directly comparing the model and the original piece will be the most helpful approach. It is vital that we verify not only that the color is consistent along the whole surface of the piece, but also that the surface itself is correct. For that, we will deactivate, or we should deactivate the texture option so that we can only see the mesh. And this is very relevant because this way we will be able to appreciate if morphological details, roughness, traumatism, pathologies, wear, or any other skeletal conditions are still observable in the digital model. Now, what happens when there are errors? Errors can come across in any stage of the scanning process. So while digitizing, for example, some of the most common errors that we may encounter are the ones that we can see listed over here. Movement of the pieces, we have talked before about this. Movement of the pieces is very common when we haven't made sure the piece was perfectly still and well holded, whether with some physical support or fixing material. And sometimes this can happen even if we took care of the position of the piece. For example, for fragmented and later reconstructed pieces, it is not weird that the glued fragments move between frames or from scan to scan, what makes it impossible to align the clouds. When this happens, the most efficient solution is to rescan the piece and make sure whatever part was causing the problem is now properly supported and fixed. Now, it is also really common for the scanner to lose track of the piece while scanning, and we saw some examples of this in the clips where we were scanning before. This can happen for various reasons, from the expert being distracted and not holding or moving the scanner appropriately, to sudden changes in the light conditions, movement of the pieces, or probably the most common reason, the scanner being incapable of understanding and following a very simple or uniform texture. This is what we were talking about just a moment ago, with long bones being problematic in this respect. Some of the newest devices in the market come with an improved technology that allows them to find themselves when lost. And for that, the expert just needs to point the scanner to any part of the bone that had been scanned previously or in a previous frame. But however, sometimes finding the track is not possible. So the only thing that we can do is stop scanning and repeat that take. Now, another situation that we are more than probably going to find when scanning is that in which suddenly artifacts or holes appear out of the blue when generating the mesh. Usually there are no signs that the point cloud is affected before or that it has any errors. And this is usually due to errors in the digital part of the process, like some algorithms didn't work out properly or the scanner malfunctioned for a moment or something like this. Here in this image of a vertebra, we can see at the right part the point cloud, which is perfect. It has no failures or no errors. And then when we generated the mesh at the left, suddenly an enormous hole appeared. So this can happen sometimes. This is what I'm talking about. Now, we can usually correct these errors without necessarily repeating the process by erasing the newly appeared artifacts or filling the holes. The thing is that when scanning bones, we will usually want the digital information to resemble reality as much as possible. And in this case, manually or automatically filling the holes is not really advised, because that lacking information will be newly created and will not represent the actual shape or surface of the original piece. So if we get to this point and cannot fill an important hole, like in this case here in the slide, or we can't erase a disturbing artifact, repeating the process will be our only option. Okay, now we can and probably will get errors also in the rest of the parts of the scanning process, like the post-processing. Some of them we have already talked about before, like the oversimplification of the mesh, of which we can see a very graphic example here in the middle part at the bottom. When the number of triangles in the mesh is too low, we lose detail to the point where the model could no longer resemble the original piece at all, like it's happening here with the breastbone mesh. In these cases, regenerating the mesh and opting for a larger number of triangles, and this way more detail should fix the result. Most of the problems, however, that we're going to encounter in this part will appear when applying the texture to the mesh. So sometimes we'll find shines, reflections, or shadows in some parts of the model, as we can see in the first picture at the bottom, in this phalanx. This phalanx texture shows a screw of the scanner's base that interfered with the camera and was then captured as a part of the proper texture of the piece. If we have a look at the third picture, the other phalanx, the black one, well, as I was saying, it shows like a burnt phalanx. Well, this phalanx wasn't burnt at all. Now, this can happen for a lot of different reasons, like changes in light, or maybe the camera of the scanner wasn't calibrated in that moment, and then suddenly the texture failed. Now, solving these situations usually involves rescanning the whole piece because we need to capture again its texture. Sometimes, and with some softwares, it is possible to take a few photos of the sample, upload them, and apply them to our mesh to externally create the texture. But this is not always the case. So finally, another option could be painting over the affected part of the texture with some editing tools usually included in the softwares, such as brushes, pencils, etc. But as I said before, this should be completely avoided. This is not the best option because when working with skeletal remains, we would be altering the original surface or appearance of the piece. Then to conclude, I would also like to shortly address export failures, like the one we can see in the picture at the top. That's another phalanx. Where the texture was incorrectly exported, as you can see. A lot of different casuistics can arise when exporting our models, and the most common problems have to do with how we name the file. So in this regard, avoiding including capital letters, spaces, punctuation marks, and so on is really, really important. To further stay away from these problems, we also recommend that you use standard 3D export formats, such as OBJ or PLY. Or, well, these are generally accepted by most 3D visors and shouldn't give you any problems. And, well, with all of this in mind, you should actually right now be able to scan different bones successfully and solve any complications you find in the way. So this is everything on our part.